Hello, game theorists. So today we are going over the repeated prisoner's dilemma game. Here are the instructions you guys saw. So standard prisoner's dilemma game, but now it's being played 3 times. So here's a way to think about these games. A repeated game is a special case of a sequential game. So you play it once, that's your first turn. Then you play it a second time, that's the second turn in the game, and you play it a third time, so that's your third move, just like a sequential game. And how do we analyze sequential games? We use rollback. So we'll apply rollback to looking at this game. Now, as another consideration that we had way back in Chapter 2. So we had these 6 considerations for thinking about games. One factor was, is the game played once or is it repeated? Why that could matter, the idea was that if the game is repeated, that can create some incentives for cooperation. If I play cooperatively in round 1, you can reward me with cooperation in round 2. Likewise, you can try to punish me if I play uncooperatively in round 1 by playing uncooperatively in round 2. That's why I expect to see more cooperation in a repeated game than in a game that's played once and only once. If the game's played only once, there's no opportunity to punish or reward someone because there is no future. The game just ends that one turn, and that's it. No scope for punishment, no scope for rewards. So with that all in mind, let's look at rollback and the prisoner's dilemma game. So with the way rollback works, we all know you go to the end of the game, in this case the third time it's played, the very last time it's being played, and then you work your way backwards. Well, we already know what happens at the very end. The very end is being played just one final time, and we know what happens when the prisoner's dilemma game is played just once. Both players confess. That's in Nash equilibrium when it's played only once. So we know that in the very final round, both players are going to confess. Now let's roll back and go and look at the second round. So everyone knows you're going to confess in round 3 because in round 3 it's the game's being played just one more time. So when the game's being played once, you confess. Now, if you know they're going to confess on you in the next round, then there's no incentive to cooperate in this round. The only reason you cooperate is if you could get rewarded in the future by more cooperation, but we know they're not going to cooperate in the last round. So there's no reward, there's no incentive to cooperate in round 2, then we're going to confess in round 2 as well. So we established we're going to confess in round 3 and also confess in round 2. Now let's go back to round 1, the very beginning of the game. You might be thinking, if we cooperate in round 1, they could reward us by cooperating in round 2, but we already know, it's established, they're going to confess in round 2, and they're going to confess again in round 3. So again, no incentive to cooperate in round 1. That means in our Nash equilibrium, both players confess in round 1. So if you only care about the payoffs, in this case, only care about prison time, then what you do is confess, 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 no matter what you think the other team is going to do. Now, you play this game in an experiment, and if you play even just a one-time version of the Prisoner's Dilemma game in an experiment, people often do cooperate at least a little bit. That's because people don't care solely about money in the real world or solely care about years in prison. We had that question on the I think it's the midterm 1 practice session, where if one prisoner strongly values loyalty, if they strongly value cooperation, that's going to change their payoffs, and that could make cooperation rational. So if there's a high enough value on cooperation or a high enough value on loyalty, then you could see cooperation in our Prisoner's Dilemma game. If you only care about prison time, though, it's going to be confess all the way through. So let's go and look at what did you guys do in this game and how did it turn out. So I noted in our earlier in-class games you guys have been less cooperative than my face-to-face classes. I've been suspecting that's due to the rather impersonal nature of online teaching. You guys don't know your classmates as well as you normally would have, so you might not feel that personal connection in the way you normally would. As a result, confessing on some random person you don't know feels different from confessing on one of your friends. So you're less cooperative than you would have been in a face-to-face class. However, I was surprised to see at least a few attempts at cooperation when you guys played this game. So here are the teams. So I randomly paired you guys against each other. So you had, looks like one pair over here where both sides just confessed all the way through. So breakout room 8 against breakout room 5, and just confessed the whole way. So consistent with the Nash equilibrium if both players only care about prison time. Now for the other pairings, there were at least some attempts at cooperation, though it never quite worked out. So here you see Team 1, which is Prisoner 3, tried to cooperate. They played not confess, but their opponents, Team 2, 7-11, they played confess. So that attempt to cooperate didn't work out. So cooperation, unsurprisingly, broke down in round 2, because if they're going to not cooperate, why should we keep playing not confess? So Team 1 unsurprisingly confessed in round 2. What surprised me, though, is that Team 2 suddenly started cooperating in round 3. I can't really think of a good story to explain that, because you got punished in round 2 when your opponents played confess, so I can't really rationalize that. I'd be curious to hear what your thought process was. Our third group over here, we had Breakout Room 6 against Prisoner 1. They started out by playing uncooperatively. So normally what happens if you see your opponent playing uncooperatively, you try to punish them and keep playing uncooperatively, so you expect to see more confessing. However, Team 2 suddenly switched to not confess in the second round, and they went back to confess in round 3. I'm not quite sure what the thought process was there. I'd be curious again to hear what was on your minds. In our last pairing, Breakout Room 2 was playing against Breakout Room 1, and Breakout Room 2 started playing not confess. So they tried to cooperate, but that was rebuffed by their opponents, who confessed on them anyways. So Team 1 punished them by playing confess. Team 2, though, suddenly switched to cooperation, not confess, but this time they're the ones who got rebuffed by their opponents. Then they went back to Nash equilibrium of everyone confesses in round 3. So there are some attempts at cooperation, but we never quite got an outcome where both sides didn't confess, so the cooperation didn't quite work out, though there was some cases here that are difficult to explain. So that wraps up our in-class game on the repeated prisoner's dilemma. Be sure to watch the rest of Chapter 10 for more about repeated games. In the meantime, stay safe out there.